about as pretty a day as I've seen. And maybe it's going to rain more. That's just great. I even stopped and waited on a train and didn't get frustrated about that. That didn't happen very often, Richard. I just stopped and waited on the train and enjoy watching it rain. Well, good morning. As the Senator mentioned, of course, the anniversary is coming up on the bombing. Actually, the former Speaker Pro Tem, Susan Winchester, of the House of Representatives, is now the chair of the Oklahoma City National Memorial, and she joined us yesterday. She was the Speaker Pro Tem my first term in the House. Of course, her husband, many of you know, Jim Winchester, is a Supreme Court Justice, but Susan's sister was killed in the bombing. She was a veterinarian with the Department of Agriculture, and she was killed in the bombing. And her sister was a near and dear friend of Lee Denny, who is the Speaker Pro Tem today in the House. They went to veterinarian school together, and so Lee and Susan were there together, and then Susan's niece, Peggy's that was killed, her sister's daughter, is married to Scott Biggs, who's a state representative now from southwest Oklahoma. And so Roz was there, and her sister works for the Department of Agriculture here in Oklahoma now, so both of the girls were there. So we had a chance to honor our House family who were connected to the bombing, and just a very emotional time with all the attention that's placed on anniversaries. We all see it as news coverage, but for the families that went through that, obviously, is a very emotional time. OETA has done a documentary, if you haven't seen it, called Resilience, that will be out. And I know they've been doing screenings in different parts of the state, and it really tells the story of the family members. It's interesting to see all those people that were touched or tied in some way. Everybody really probably knows somebody who either was affected or knows somebody who knows somebody who was affected, and that's amazing to think about. Out of the 168 lives, how we're all connected back to that day. We did have really was a difficult week at the House. We lost a member last week. Representative David Dank passed away at his home last week, and so we had that funeral service yesterday and honored Representative Dank and his life. He followed his wife, who served in the legislature. Odelia Dank was there when I was first elected, and when she turned out, David was elected. But the person that held that seat before Odelia Dank ran for office was a young lady by the name of Mary Fallon. That was where she started out in politics in her early 30s in that House seat, and so she was at the service yesterday and spoke. And really, it's difficult when you spend as much time as you do with people, either in your own party or the other party across the aisle. You spend as much time in the living room, so to speak, on the House floor as we do, or on the Senate floor as the senators do. They really become like family to you, and it really becomes a routine, just like all of us at work. You report to the Capitol on Monday. We're there through the week. Everybody leaves on Thursday, and you assume everyone will walk back through the door on Monday, and that doesn't always happen. And so we remember Representative Dank, who, as the Senator mentioned, had done an incredible amount of work on tax credit reform, as well as senior issues, children's issues, a number of initiatives that he had worked on in his career, and a great state leader even before he got there, working with the Retailers Association in oil and gas business. About everything that could be done, David Dank did, from racing horses to volunteering at the Baptist Children's Home and everything in between, in Republican politics after he switched from being a Democrat, which was he was involved in that party as well, and was a journalist as well, Lynn, in both print and radio. And so we had a tough week, but we amended a bill yesterday before the funeral, the tax credit reform that the Senator alluded to on Wynn, that Mr. Dank had worked on for years and years and years. We didn't hear his bill this year. Chairman Sears was trying to negotiate an agreement. We didn't hear his bill. And on Thursday, Thursday afternoon, Chairman Sears was trying to call Representative Dank to let him know that we didn't hear his bill, but his exact language from the bill that he filed was going to be what was ultimately used in the compromise. And Representative Sears didn't get him. And then Friday, of course, was when he was found had passed away. But his exact language ended up being what we used in that reform bill, and we named that act in his honor yesterday, along with the other tax credit acts that we're working on that he'd been so involved in, to actually study our tax credits, incentives, and exemptions in Oklahoma. You all do that in your businesses every day. You do that in your personal budgets every day. You look at your balance sheet, you look at your expenditures, you look at your revenue. It's hard to believe the state of Oklahoma doesn't do that. These tax credits get put on the books and they just stay there. And no one ever goes back to see if they're generating more revenue for the state than what they're costing us. And we've not had a system in place to evaluate those, and it's close to $2 billion every year that we give away in tax dollars. Now, I say that it's not just economic development incentives. It's not just what Senator Marlette was alluding to with the wind industry and other manufacturing credits. That also includes exemptions, things like sales tax exemptions for veterans, sales tax exemptions on products that ultimately will be taxed in its final form, such as agriculture and other business exemptions. That also includes your standard deduction on your income tax, your mortgage deduction on your income tax, things that every one of us room uses. And so when you start talking about reforming those, you start touching a lot of people across the state who start calling the Capitol saying, well, get rid of all the others except for the ones that affect me. And that becomes the challenge as we study these. But we have to have a system in place to review those. And thanks to the work that Representative Dank did starting years ago, we are well on our way finally this year to getting that done. Senator Marlette mentioned the ads that are running, and I have to kind of chuckle about the efforts we've made in road and bridge funding, and you all know that, and we were way behind. We did not increase funding for the Department of Transportation from 1984 until 2004. Their budget was $200 million. We finally made great progress, and instead of getting calls about bridge problems and potholes and those things, we get calls about construction zones now, and that's a good change of pace for us, particularly in northwest Oklahoma. But we have made great progress. We don't want to go backwards, but we also have to make sure that we can operate state government. And I say we, you, as taxpayers, all of us together, have put over $2 billion into roads and bridges the last couple of years by increasing what we're spending every year to catch up on bridges. And we're still having to close bridges. We're not there yet. In the last couple of weeks, there have been 2 or 3 bridges in the state that had to be closed on state highways. And when you close a state highway bridge, there's usually not a good way to get around to get where you need to go. And so we're still in a very difficult spot because we ignored it for so long. But we have made a tremendous investment. You've made a tremendous investment that is important both for economic development purposes and for public safety. Having safer roads, having shoulders on roads, having cable barriers and medians, all of those things are things that you have done, and nobody can question what you as citizens of the state have done. That $2 billion that we've invested, and so we're making progress. And I just want to make sure everybody understands that when you see a little 30-second TV ad, and start wondering what's going on. Everybody, every agency, every entity likes to get the money that they're receiving from the taxpayers and then a little more. And when you have to reprioritize, obviously people like to protect what they already have, which makes it challenging. There are still, as the Senator mentioned, we sent about 100 less, maybe just a little less than 100 less bills over to the Senate this year, which is unusual. I think the budget drives part of that. When you don't have money, I think members realize new programs or changes you want to make that are going to have a fiscal impact obviously aren't going very far with the budget. And so we sent less than 300 bills over to the House this year. A lot of the bills that are filed early in session get a lot of attention because members can file bills on any given topic that they want. In the House, we limit our members to 8. The Senate has an unlimited number. There are always a lot of bills that get a lot of media attention, and they're bills that don't end up going anywhere, but they get a lot of attention early in the session. And so a lot of those go by the wayside or aren't approved in committee or aren't approved on the House floor. And so we ended up sending about 250 House bills, I think, over to the Senate. I think maybe they sent us 369 or something like that. So we're working through that, but not a lot of policy work in terms of the volume we normally see. So really, we're down to wrapping up some of those policy issues, not as many as usual, but getting the budget done and being able to adjourn, and hopefully adjourn a little bit early prior to our last Friday in May deadline. With the budget like it is, the sooner that we can adjourn, the more money we're able to save our House and Senate budget as well. So we're working towards that goal. But some of the policy issues that are out there, there's some talk on education. Obviously, the standards process is still in place. We still don't have new standards yet. I've been frustrated by the lack of effort by the State Department of Education, the State Board of Education, in getting new standards passed. We sent a bill to them literally right out a year ago now with an emergency clause that meant when the governor signed that bill, it was immediately in effect, and the standards development for Oklahoma should start immediately. And just in the last few weeks, we finally were given the process that the State Department and the board will use to develop the standards. Not the standards, but the process. So now we have a process, so now we can start. Those have to be developed, and that's not an easy job when you start talking about developing standards for our school systems. That's not an easy job, and I'm pleased we have a process in place now. I hope it works quickly because that has to be done for the legislature to review by next session. However, the good news about that is that we have brought together for the first time, and this is just shocking to me, but we've brought together for the first time higher education, career tech, and common education to look at our standards in Oklahoma. We invest a great deal in human capital and in higher education, a great deal of expertise there, as well as career tech. We want our students to be college and career ready, but we operate in these silos, and we don't ever talk about, what do we need from each other? What does higher ed need from common ed? What does career tech need from common ed? What does common ed need from higher ed and career tech they can offer to them in terms of expertise? We invest all these dollars in all these areas, but we've never brought them together to talk about how do we prepare these students for what's next. And we're doing that for the first time, and that part of the process is going very well. I've heard from both higher education and career tech. They are very pleased with the conversations. It's amazing to me that it's 2015 and we're just now having those conversations as a state. But it's a wonderful process that we're going through, and I'm really pleased that we have all of our partners in education working together to help us to develop a better education system in Oklahoma, and doing that as Oklahomans working together, and I think that's an important thing to know. Testing is obviously being discussed, but it's kind of the chicken and the egg, or the cart and the horse, so to speak. Do you make drastic changes in your testing before you have your standards developed, and then change your testing again after your standards are developed? And so that's the conversation that's going on at the Capitol, is do we just leave everything alone for this year, look at the standards next year, and then make decisions on what we do on testing? And so that's all part of the conversation, is do we do something this year on testing and then have to change it again, or do we just leave it in place with what we have and go forward? And really a bigger discussion even about what testing is about, what we need testing for, how we do testing. Should it be benchmark testing to see from the beginning to the end of the year how our students move, or should it be end of instruction testing? All of those conversations are going on in great detail at the Capitol. And along with our reading tests as well. We had the schools come to us last year and ask us to delay for 2 more years. We initially had implemented a law that gave schools 4 years to get to the point where 3rd graders had to be reading at reading level before they moved on to the 4th grade. But we gave schools 4 years to get ready and get those students prepared before that went into effect. Because again, as we all know, you learn to read up to that point, and you read to learn from that point forward. And if students can't read going forward, they will struggle for the rest of their career. Our illiteracy rate in Oklahoma is higher than it's ever been. The number of illiterate Oklahomans now, it's incredible how much that has increased just over the past few decades. And that's a real problem. It's a workforce problem. It's a quality of life problem to have citizens that can't read, and so we have to address that as a state. But the schools came in last year and said, we had 4 years, but it just hasn't been enough time. We're still not ready to get to this point of saying students have to be reading at grade level. We need more time. And so we extended that for 2 more years. And so this year and next year, we still don't have that final cutoff. There are teams in place, parents and educators and others that are reading specialists that are involved in those decisions now. And so we've delayed that. And again, that conversation continues to make sure that the reading test is appropriate, to maybe see if we need some intervention earlier than just waiting until 3rd grade, and that's the point. Do we need to also have evaluation in 1st and 2nd grade and catch this earlier? And so all of that is part of the conversation that's going on. So when you hear talk about the policies related to testing, just wanted to give you an update on where we are in that conversation and what's happening in that area. The budget is challenging, as the Senator mentioned, not so much because of our economy, but because of the budget system we've created with tax credits that I mentioned, the earmarks that Senator Marlette mentioned that automatically go off the top, and they go off the top to priorities. They go off the top automatically to roads and bridges. They go off the top to OLAP that pays for students that can't afford to come to Northwestern or other colleges and universities. They make good grades in high school and do what we ask them to do. We'll pay for them to go to college. Teachers' retirement system, public employees' retirement system, the House Bill 1017 fund that sends more money to our schools, doesn't come through the appropriations process. And so when people talk about the money education is getting, they leave that out because it doesn't come through the appropriations process. All of those things go off the top, as we say. You have this pot of money that comes in, and all these things are taken out, and then whatever is left is what the legislature has to appropriate. It's the what is left part that is shrinking because the off the top part that comes off first is growing. As those programs grow automatically, we paid the bill. It's whatever the amount is, it's paid. And so as that part grows, what's left shrinks. And that's why we're looking at a $611 million shortfall this year is the what's left pot is $611 million smaller. And the reason that becomes more challenging, our budget chairman went back and ran a report from 2009 forward on what cuts we have made, because we have been reducing our spending as that pot has been declining as we've gone through the recession. Those numbers have been declining, but we always build a budget 1 year at a time. And we had never really gone back and looked at what had happened since 2009. It was amazing to see many of our agencies had been cut 25 to 30% of their budget. A fourth to a third of their budget was gone since 2009. Incredible numbers. And we hear a lot of talk about education, and they had their protests at the Capitol recently, and other entities. Common education, our public schools, and you all need to know this, their state appropriation since 2009 has been cut 1.85%. 1.85%. Now that's still a cut, and we know we have a teacher shortage. We have more students in the classroom. We need to get dollars into the classroom. We know that. But the truth is, it's been a priority. And a lot of people don't realize the amount of money we're spending on education and how it has been protected since 2009 as best we can. Higher education hasn't fared as well, but better than most. They've been about 5.5%. Career tech and the other third prong of education has been cut about 12% since 2009. But again, just to put all of that into perspective, the people of Oklahoma put a priority in education. It's reflected in where we spend our money. Just like in your personal budget, your priorities are reflected in where you spend your money. We're spending over half of our budget on education. And I just want you to be aware of how those things have happened in terms of our budgeting when you look at the big picture. That's what becomes problematic, though, when you start putting this budget together and you start talking about another 6 or 7% cut for some of these agencies that have been cut 25 to 30%. You get to the point where something's got to give. Programs will end. There will be things that go away this year in this budget, and that's why it's so important for us to get these reforms in place on both capping some of this off the top money and looking at tax credits, because it really is becoming a budget crisis, not a revenue crisis, but a budget crisis. We have the revenue. It's just how it's going out and being dispensed that is having a dramatic effect on our ability to reprioritize. We did pass legislation through the Senate that I had sent over to the Senate from the House. It's headed to the governor's desk on a corrections reform issue. It's a small issue, but an important issue. It's one that Tom Ward brought forward several years ago to me and others, and it will allow our offenders, when they leave, to get a second chance at joining the workforce in jobs that require a CDL. Currently, you can get a provisional driver's license. You can't get a CDL. So if an employer is wanting to give someone a second chance after they leave Bill Johnson or another facility, they can't get a job. They can't have a second chance being a saltwater truck driver. They can't have a second chance being a delivery truck driver. It excludes a lot of things, and it really doesn't make sense. And so we did send a bill to the governor this week that would allow those offenders to get a provisional CDL. Only can be used again in the line of a job. We've set the system up where you can't get your license, you can't get your CDL, all of those things until you've paid back what you owe the state. And then we have a system set up where you can't get to work, particularly in rural Oklahoma. There's no public transportation, and so we want you to pay back the victims, we want you to pay back the state, but we're not going to let you drive to work. And we're not going to let you have a job, particularly in this area where it's needed, saltwater truck drivers, whatever it may be. If their offense was related to DUI or something related to that, they would not qualify for this program. But a simple change that hopefully will allow someone who leaves Bill Johnson, for example, to have that second chance to support themselves and their family and not return to what it was that got them in prison in the first place, where you're paying for them once again to feed them, house them, clothe them in our correctional system. So that's just one of several corrections reform measures that are moving through. A few that we sent over that didn't make it out of the Senate, but several that are still alive, and hopefully we can continue to address that crisis that we continue to have in our corrections system. I'll stop there and be happy to take any questions. I will tell you, if anyone wants to look at, I have some budget documents. Really, the saving grace, particularly for the education budget, for common education, has been the growth in property tax. While the state appropriation has been kind of goes this up and down cycle, property tax continues to grow each and every year, and that's why the education budget here talk about it not being where it used to be. Common education in particular had a higher budget last year than ever in the history of our state. Even though the appropriation goes up and down, peaks and valleys, property tax grows, the off-the-top money grows, federal money has been in place, and particularly because of the property tax growth, we had more money available. Now we have more students in the classroom, we have a shortage of teachers, and those are all things we have to address. But when you look at the picture, the entire picture, which is finally what we're getting to in our budgeting process of looking at the entire picture of all of these agencies, federal dollars, local dollars, everything, whether it's education or corrections or public safety or Medicaid, healthcare, we're to that point now. There are opportunities when you face a challenge or a crisis, and we're in that opportunity to learn how to better budget as a state and as a legislature to better analyze where the dollars are coming from and where they're going, and we are making progress. Texting bill is out there, still to be considered, the texting and driving bill. The Senate changed it from a secondary offense to a primary offense. I think there's a good chance the House accepts that amendment, sends that to the governor's desk to make texting and driving a primary offense, which means that you can be stopped for that. You remember when the seatbelt law was implemented, originally it was a secondary offense. You had to be stopped for speeding or something else. If you didn't have your seatbelt on, then you could be cited for that. That's how the texting bill originally was written, but it has been changed now to be a primary offense where they can observe you texting, and that bill's still floating around. A bill to address pay for our appellate court judges. Last year, all of the judges, except for the appellate courts, the Supreme Court justices and others, got pay raises because the court said they didn't have the money. Come to find out, their budget director, I think, made a mistake, and so the judges and justices have been trying to get that fixed, because there are now district court judges making more than Supreme Court justices, which, as you can imagine, causes a little bit of consternation in the court. And we hear from them quite frequently about that. And so that issue is still floating around. Of course, the Native American Cultural Center continues to be an issue for us to find a way to deal with, a way to finish. With no new money to do it, you've got to figure out a way to either partner with Oklahoma City or find a solution not using any new money, because there is no new money. But we continue to spend about $2 million a year on operations of that facility, about $5 million a year paying off our existing bond debt on that, so we're spending $7 million a year. It's not something we can ignore. And so that's another one that's out there that is a loose end that has to be tied up hopefully sooner rather than later, and move on as well. Questions? Oh, the Capitol building, yes. The Capitol building project is moving forward. Contractors have been selected both for the inside and outside of the building. Construction should be starting soon on the outside. Our say construction, it's really restoration projects to keep the stone from falling off and hitting someone when you walk up to your state capitol. And then we can remove those ugly green or ugly yellow barricades that get in all Lynn's pictures he shoots when he comes down to shoot weddings and other things at the Capitol. But we're finally making progress on that. We will have a report at the end of this year on what the $120 million bond issue that we passed will buy us, and what they have discovered that is beyond that, and then make a decision of is there more work that needs to be done, what's that going to cost, and how do we address that. But we are making progress on the Capitol building. It will be done in phases. The legislature obviously has to have the chamber. If we would move out and rent space, it would be incredibly expensive. Our voting machines and microphones and all of that, the staff space. So the building will be done in phases, and the basement obviously is the big problem, because it had a dirt floor when the Capitol was built. It was covered with asphalt, and the terrazzo was put over the top of that. And so now, as the sewer lines are collapsing, there's a reason you can smell that when you visit the Capitol on certain days. It's because of the way that was completed. So the basement in its entirety had to be gutted, have a new floor put in, sewer, water, wiring, original wiring in the building from 1916, 1917 when the Capitol was actually constructed. It's a wonder we had a fire, but it will be a project, one hopefully that we can do once and preserve the building and be done with it and to be maintained from this point forward. But there is some progress being made on preserving your Capitol building, which is good news. We could never go out and recreate that building. It's a gift from previous generations of Oklahomans, and it's sad it hasn't been maintained, but we would never be able to afford to replace it, and it needs to be preserved.
That was our bill, by the way, that did that.
It's true. It's true.
It's amazing. I had a guy or a couple of guys from Austin come in that are in the oil and gas business. They do a lot of investment in Northwest Oklahoma, and I hosted them for the turkey hunt. So I picked them up at the airport. We went to the governor, lieutenant governor, to the historical center. But they had some free time. They said, we want to see your Capitol. So I took them to the Capitol and let them. We walked in on the Senate side, but we walked out so they could see the front. We walked out on the front, and they said they walked underneath the scaffolding with the stuff over their head, and they said, "Oh, are you guys doing some work on this place?" I said, "Actually, that's here to keep the facade from falling off on your head." And they said, they were like, "Are you serious?" And I said, "Yeah." And they said, "Man, you guys, that's." They said, and I told them that we were redoing it, and they said, "You got a beautiful facility." They said, "This is great." They loved it, and they said, "You've got an extensive art collection here. I hope you guys will really do what you can to maintain it." They were really impressed with the building, really impressed with the art. Left a really good impression on them as far as what Oklahoma does, but if I had to say no, the facade's falling off, and we haven't convinced the rest of the body to do anything about it, it would be quite embarrassing. At least now we can say we're addressing it, we're making an investment, and we're going to maintain it. But it is a phenomenal building and something that we should be proud of and take care of.
Questions? Yes, ma'am.
Since there's such a large deficit, is it possible to rescind the income tax cuts?
Anything's possible. As the senator mentioned, though, we don't have a revenue problem. We've got the money. It's just where the money is going. So it's really not a revenue problem. I don't think there is. I haven't heard any talk or any. I don't think there's any. The votes aren't there to make any changes in that. And in the $611 million, the cost of that this year will be less than $60 million. So it's almost like a drop in the bucket compared to the entire challenge that we face. But I don't think there's any. I don't think there will be any effort. I've not heard anyone at the Capitol in terms of legislators talking about making changes to that. But that is such a small piece of the puzzle. And again, it's not a revenue problem. We've got the revenue. It's just the revenue's not in the part that we get to appropriate. The revenue is getting out to agencies in different forms and fashions. It's just not coming through us because the revenue is going away, or not going away, but going out to those agencies before what's left gets to us. So we talk about the shortfall. It's a shortfall in what the legislature has to spend, not necessarily a shortfall in what's getting to state agencies.
And when you look at it, there's not necessarily a direct correlation in higher tax rate and higher revenues. In 2005, we had a 7% income tax and a $5 billion budget for the appropriators, and now we're at 5. We got $7 billion. So the direct correlation, there's not a direct correlation of higher taxes, higher revenue, as far as that goes. And I've had some people talk about, last year we worked on the gross production tax and how we changed it, and I had people saying, well, maybe you shouldn't have done the gross production tax last year the way that you did. Well, actually, the gross production tax we did last year was an increase in what they were paying on their taxes. So we didn't cut as much as people want to say. We did a cut on them. We didn't do a cut on them. We increased the rate that they pay and made it permanent. And that actually doesn't even take effect until July 1. So we're not even seeing the ramifications. They'll actually be paying more taxes starting July 1 of this year. So people who want to say that that's part of the problem, we're not even seeing. We haven't even changed that rate until July 1 of this year.
And the income tax cut doesn't take effect until January 1 of next year, so we're not even seeing any effect of that at this point either. It will make sure everybody's still paying 5 1/4 until the end of this year. We don't want anybody to get in any trouble with their taxes. The new
violent offenders and sex offenders. So I mean, I think it's got a chance. You never can tell whenever those things come to the floor. If somebody makes a presentation that this is the perception that this is soft on crime, they can tank really fast. And unfortunately, sometimes people are not really aware of what they're voting on. They're just worried about the political ramifications that may be coming, and so it's easier to vote no. You can always explain a no vote, right? So sometimes that's what happens. So we need to make sure that Senator Shaw is well versed and very cautious on how he handles questions of debate, because bills like that it's amazing. Sometimes a bill like that can get tanked, and when you throw a bill up there, and if they think that there's some sort of federal funding issues that could somehow be tied to Obamacare. I mean, somebody will ask that question, is this a way to get Obamacare into Oklahoma? That bill's going down real fast, because people just, well, he said it, and I'm scared to vote aye on it now, and so it's really funny how some of that stuff works. But that bill in particular, I think he can get it off the floor. I don't know if it's got to go back over there, but I'm sure these guys can get it out on the House side, but I think it's got a chance.
It's one of the challenges with social media too on a lot of these issues at the Capitol is that someone can put something out that's not true. I mean, people get their news from so many different places now. It used to be you just got it from your local newspaper and maybe the state paper, the Oklahoma, the Tulsa World. We all watched 3 networks for our news, and that's where you got your information. There were editors that checked the facts and held reporters accountable, and now anybody can do that with social media, and so things can be put out there with no editors and no fact checkers on social media and get groups stirred up or people stirred up, and calls generated at the Capitol, emails generated at the Capitol that aren't rooted in truth at all. But if that happens in the middle of a debate on the floor, or questions on the floor, I mean, things can take on a life of their own and really not be rooted in truth, and it becomes very difficult for citizens to sort out the truth from everything else, to know, where do you get your information and get accurate information. It becomes difficult for legislators to sort through, where are these calls coming from? Why am I hearing this? This isn't what the bill says, but do I need to check this out? The internet and social media has definitely changed and complicated how we do business. And cell phones and text messages. Members getting text messages literally as they're voting on bills. I mean, it's a very different place, a very different way to operate than it used to be, and when you're voting on those issues.
And when you have an opposing group working a bill that, I know you don't believe this, but they don't always tell the truth on what happened with the bill. And so, but I had a guy the other day, it was on a bill that I was carrying for the pro tem, and fortunately, I know the guy, smart guy, business guy, has always been really engaged, calls me and he's like, this is a horrible bill, I don't know why you're doing this. And he starts explaining to me, I said, wait, have you read the bill? No, I'm going off of the email I got. And I said, read the bill and call me back. He called me back, he's like, okay, you're fine. But that's, go ahead, it's a good bill. But that's what, if they can either take original language and say this is what the bill does, or they can just distort it and send it out to their members, and you start getting mass emails. It's very frustrating at times, especially when the truth is not being represented about what the bill does. So.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation.